What's up, guys? On today's episode, we're going to be putting a brand new exhaust system in the Audi R8. And as you know, I love this car, but if I had one gripe, I'd say that the exhaust system's a little bit too tame for how beautiful this car is. So for me to put a new exhaust system on, I had three criteria that needed to be met before I actually put it on the car. The first one was I wanted to have a valve system, meaning when the valves are open, I want it to be really, really loud, but when I want it to be quiet, I want to push a button and have the valves close so that I can pull into the garage and not wake everybody, that sort of thing. Number two, I wanted that system to be integrated into the car, meaning I didn't want a big toggle switch or some big red button or something goofy, nor do I want it to be fumbling around and find my keys and have to put a key fob and push it and hold it and do all that kind of thing. I didn't want that. So number three was a big one. I didn't want it to drone. So let's say I wanted it open on the highway and I wanted to hear that rumble and have that strong feeling. I didn't want my ears to bleed either with that weird pitch. So I was hoping they can kind of neuter that sound out with some engineering in the baffles and things like that. So to do that, I found a company called Soul Performance in Southern Pennsylvania. They're amazing. And I'm driving down there. We're going to see the behind the scenes look of what it takes to make a custom exhaust. So that and a lot more coming up on this episode of Drive and Protect. All the way in. So they touch up paint on. You can hear it. After my 3-hour journey to Willow Grove, Pennsylvania, I drove directly into the warehouse and parked next to the engineering and fabrication stations, eager to get a tour of the facility. I was greeted by Mike Spock, Soul's marketing manager, for my tour.
So I'd like to give you a little inside look on how we're going to build your exhaust in our facility. So George is currently welding a 991.2 Sport Cat. You'll notice we're using aluminum heat sinks, top and bottom, to make sure that it doesn't warp during welding. He's also back purging this particular product, which strengthens the welds, make sure everything is fully penetrated. We want to have a perfectly fitting product every time. And we do that with those fixtures right over here. And these are some of our thick gauge aluminum fixtures in which we use to build and test fitment. That's actually what we use to kit the individual pieces and pipings to make sure everything fits smoothly before we weld it together in the fixture.
These are essentially fiberglass casts, similar to the ones you might wear if you broke your arm, let's say. They are designed to mold or shape to the exact contour and bend for each vehicle's exhaust system. It's basically a big jigsaw puzzle or stencil that matches the car's exhaust, but allows Soul to customize each of those sections based on the customer's unique request for valves or otherwise. From there, I met with my exhaust engineer, Oliver. He'll be building my entire system based on my three must-haves.
We're super excited to have your car here today. I know you have three concerns with your exhaust system that we're going to be building for you. First being, you want the car to start up quietly. We have a solution for that. It's going to be a valved exhaust system. Now, what makes this difference is the valve is going to be starting closed versus most systems start open. So you won't be waking up the neighborhood, you won't be waking up your kids.
That's right.
I know that's a concern of my own.
For sure.
On top of that, I know you were concerned with drone, resonance, tone, all of those things. So what we've done here, this is a quick mock-up of a muffler we're designing for you, right. And here's our print of how this is going to go together. So what this is going to do is this is a chambered X-pipe muffler. So we're going to be able to dial in the frequencies and pull the drone out of it and also give you a smooth European V8 sound versus an American muscle car grunt. For your third concern, you wanted it to be integrated in the car and look like it belonged there without being out of place with some big tacky toggle switch, right, or light or whatever it may be. So what we're going to do is we're going to hide wires to your garage door opener so everything looks OEM and the way it should be.
Now, a few weeks prior to my visit, I contacted Soul with my vision for what I wanted out of a custom exhaust system, and after our initial conversation, Oliver built a mock-up of the muffler and the entire system using a 3D modeling software called SolidWorks.
This is simulating your valves open, so your main flow obviously is going to be going through your strafe pipes, but you're also getting a partial blend, which is going to smooth the sound out, and you still get some coming out of your other exhaust pipes.
By controlling this flow with the X-pipe instead of a dense packing material, the chambers themselves are used to cancel out the drone or the negative frequencies while creating an exotic tone from the Audi V8. But before we get started, I wanted to compare the current sound decibels and tone with the new exhaust later on in the episode with a very simple test. Okay, before we get started, I wanted to do a test, of course, to figure out what it sounded like before we put the exhaust on and afterwards. Mind you, afterwards, we're going to be putting valve system in, so we're going to be playing with that as well. The fun thing that is a little bit challenging to get on film is the sound is somewhat subjective, but when we do numbers, that's obviously not subjective. So what I did is I got a $5 app for my iPhone, and then we have a cool little technical machine that they have here that shows the decibels. Basically what we did was we pulled the R8 back out of their shop, put the door down a little bit. Apparently it's got really good sound out here. And we put the tire in the exact same spots. Then we measured out 15 feet and put a pipe right here, exhaust pipe right here to signify it. We're gonna leave both of the meters on the ground, and then we're gonna do a couple of tests. One's gonna be at idle, then at 3,000, and then at 6,000. Then we're gonna obviously do the work and then come back and see the difference.
I'm using 2 different decibel meters to allow for some margin of error. Again, this isn't really a perfect test, but hopefully enough to show a meter difference between OEM sounds versus the new exhaust when the valves are closed and when they're open. While Mike hops in the car, notice the outside sound is pretty consistent between 62 and roughly 65 dB between the two devices. I realized later that the iPhone was probably getting less sound or a different kind of sound because of my iPhone case, so I'll be using round numbers going forward. After initial startup, idle is about 70 decibels. Test number 1 to about 3,000 RPMs was roughly 77 decibels. And for test number 2 to 6,000 RPM was about 90 decibels. Again, it's a bit challenging to hold up throttle perfectly at 3,000 and 6,000 RPM, but you get the idea. I'll post stats at the end of the video when we do a comparison test between the old and the new, and trust me, it's worth the wait. The new exhaust is insane. Okay, step 1 is pretty straightforward. Disassemble the car and remove the OEM exhaust and inspect how Audi intended it to be mounted and secured to the vehicle. Having this data now is vital as you build the new exhaust system so that it fits perfectly. Sol always weighs their original system to compare it to the new one. In my case, the original exhaust weighs 62.7 pounds. More on this later. Before the build can begin, they first need to cut out the materials needed for the design. The internal chamber structures, or walls, are created with an industrial laser cutter. Then, the tubing for the system is bent with a mandrel bender for maximum exhaust flow.
Okay, so mandrel bending is actually pretty cool, and it's used on most performance applications today. To give you an example, I'm using 2 basic straws. The first one, as I blow air through it, it's unrestricted, it's pretty good. But as you bend it, there's a kink. You see that kink right there? And obviously, no air goes in or out. Again, it's an example. And this is typically found on older vehicles on the exhaust. You'll see it kind of kink around as it kicks out the back of the car. Now, mandrel bending, as you bend, let's say the straw or the pipe, do you see how it bends and the diameter stays the same? So as you kink around like this, the airflow stays the same. So that's great for performance stuff, intakes, exhausts, that sort of thing. And basically what happens is a mandrel is a metal tube that runs through the pipe, and as it bends, it gives something to hammer against, gives something for the machine to push against, and it doesn't just kink like that. So again, a crude example, but that's what makes these particular bends and these particular pipes so crucial or critical to a quality exhaust.
Next, basic flanges and brackets are cut out with a 90,000 psi water jet, while the Haas CNC machine makes the more intricate hanging brackets and mating surface flanges from the header to the exhaust system itself. Each of these components are manufactured to ISO 9001 standards, which allows Sol the ability to offer a lifetime warranty on all their exhaust systems, including ones that are used on the track, which no one else does. Next, the big jigsaw puzzle of tubes and flanges are tack welded together to mimic the 3D rendering of the muffler mocked up by Oliver earlier in the week. Once all tack welds are in place, Oliver then TIG welds the mating surfaces for the final step. To do this, they first seal off the open end or the backside of the weld with green tape, which locks in argon gas that is fed through a tube and a rubber plug stopper. By filling, or what's referred to as back purging, the cavity with the argon gas instead of regular air, the backside of the welds are not subject to oxidation because no oxygen is present. In other words, it's considered best practice for welding, and it minimizes failure in the future for a whole host of reasons. With the X-pipe in place, they welded the chamber walls together, forming the structure or the housing of the muffler itself. Then the baffles are hammered into the muffler housing for a tight fit before welding them together while using the same back purging technique as we showed before. With the muffler now done, they focused on the exhaust system by welding the exit pipes, valves, and flanges on. Next, the hanging brackets and support rods are carefully measured and then welded to the pipe in the OEM position for a precise installation. Then the system is test fitted to the muffler and holes cut out for mating two pipes into one. From there, much sanding and refinement is done to ensure the pieces fit perfectly together with no leaks. Once smooth, the exit pipes are welded to the muffler and the spider-looking system is starting to take shape. Now, before the inaugural start, the guys wanted to weigh their creation on the scale. The previous model was roughly 62 pounds, and this one topped out at about 40 pounds, or a 22-pound weight savings off the rear of the car. With that, they quickly threw it on the R8 for the initial test fit and confirmation that all the brackets were perfectly placed before their final touches, which would include their own proprietary mixture of media blasting to create their signature texture and color, plus an amazing surprise of the AMMO logo etched into the muffler housing. Now granted, it would be covered by heat shields, but it was quite meaningful to me to know that it was back there. Now with all that done, the heat shield and its 10,000 screws are back in place. The boys lifted the exhaust and the shield back into the hanging brackets and mated the stock header to the exhaust flange and then tightened them back into place. With the exhaust mounted, the R8 is lifted so that the vacuum lines to the valve system can be run off the original steel lines, allowing me to open and close the system with the push of a button.
So here's how the valve system works. You have your existing vacuum lines from your OEM muffler and valves here. What we did is we added in our electronic controller, which switches the vacuum source on and off, and that is controlled by the electronic controller that is put up in here. So this is your antenna wire. The garage door opener in your car is going to send the signal to this receiver to tell the valves to open and close on demand.
Then, the exhaust is given one last wipe down before the aluminum bumper is installed and secured to the original heat shield. Next, the taillights, intake box, and side blade air scoops are reinstalled. Finally, with the bumper replaced, I noticed new tailpipes in a much different shape. Now, ironically, the tailpipes are just fixtures and they're not physically attached to the actual tailpipe itself, which is kind of a bummer. I realized this during the wrap episode when I was cleaning the backside of the rear bumper and saw the plasticky type clips. But from what I understand, under load or when it gets hot, the pipes expand and stick out, and then of course when they're cold, they contract and they come back in. So to avoid this, there is a gap between the actual pipes and the ones you see standing behind the car, let's say, to account for this in and out movement. Regardless of that, Sol surprised me with a custom single wall tip made from bare .065 thick piping in the shape of a sideways 8. To do this, they cut two pipes straight down the middle and then sanded both edges. Afterwards, they welded them together and cut them to the proper depth or the length to allow for that OEM expansion and contraction. Then afterwards, they powder coated them black, which looks 1,000 times better than the stock ones. After the wing is reinstalled, license plate lights pushed back in, and a few final touches, the time has come for my first startup.
Big moment.
With the R8 idling and the guys checking their work, Oliver then showed me the stock key fob that comes with all their systems and explained how they open and where they're located. But clearly, the stock microphones on my camera are no match for this exhaust. Here is another listen from about 50 feet away from my Zoom H4n sound recorder to help you hear the tone variance from a different recording device. Now, to complete our decibel comparison test, we set up the R8 in the exact same location as before, measured 15 feet, and set up the gauges to see if there is a measurable difference. Just as a point of reference, remember the OEM exhaust from about 15 feet at idle was 70 dP, 3,000 RPM was 77 decibels, and 6,000 RPM was about 90 or so. For test 1, we started the car with the valves closed and it idled at roughly 70 to 80 decibels, slightly higher than stock, but not by much. Next, at 3000 RPMs, the meters were consistent at about 82 to 84 decibels. Finally, with the valves closed at 6000 RPM was about 98 to 100 decibels. Now, for the valves open at idle, the meters read two different numbers, and I'm not exactly sure why, but the iPhone was about 85-ish, and the digital meter was about 70, so on average, it's slightly more intense than stock, but not by much. Next, with the valves open at 3000 RPM, was 88 to 90 decibels. Then, at 6000 RPM, wide open is about 103 to 105 decibels. As a point of reference, here is a quick decibel chart with common noises for comparison and where the stock exhaust, the sole exhaust with closed valves, and the sole with open valves sits on this chart. As you can see, the strength or the volume is not wildly different from stock to sole, which is exactly what I wanted, but what you can't see here is the amazing tone or the music that the muffler now orchestrates from the 4.2-liter V8. Now, with all that said, this test was done under no load or without driving. So my buddy Paul in his GT4 with a sole exhaust system and myself in the R8, we went for a little drive out front of the shop to see how they sounded and to compare the V6 to the V8. But either way, they both sounded incredible.
Guys, it's been a couple of weeks since I've put the exhaust on and it's absolutely incredible. I'm so happy, but I want to give you a quick recap. First, going from the OEM exhaust to the closed valve new exhaust, there really wasn't a huge difference. Now, it sounded different, meaning the tone was different, but the loudness wasn't any different, meaning it wasn't like I was screaming now with a new exhaust. It was the same volume, but they were just talking different languages. It's a much throatier, more aggressive feel or sound to it. Now, with the new exhaust, if I open it up like I have right now, it is way louder. It's about 10 to 13 decibels louder, and it's incredibly aggressive. I mean, listen to this. Outside the car, it sounds insane. The coolest part is, so if I'm in 6th gear right now, if I go down to 5th, I'm about 80 miles an hour, 75 miles an hour in 5th. If I go and close it right now, do you hear it? With the push of a button, I'm still doing the same. I'm 4,000 RPM right now. It's absolutely silent. Now, if I push the button again, I don't know if you can hear this on camera. I mean, come on, that's pretty amazing. So, obviously I couldn't be happier. I do think that the exhaust now matches the look of the R8, meaning the R8 is very aggressive, very sexy, dangerous kind of looking, but I didn't think the exhaust was congruent with that, the original one, but now it sounds amazing. So big shout out, thank you to the Soul guys. I am super happy, the car is amazing, and as always, thanks for watching guys, I'll see you next time.